My brother Michael was an electrician. He was working with a colleague to install a security system, and he suffered a fatal electric shock. He'd cut a cable and he'd thrown it down to his colleague, and that cable was labelled not in use. Now, he was stripping insulating material from the cable when he got to the live wire, and it was energised to mains voltage of 230 volts. The HSE inspector said if he'd been holding his snips by the insulated grips, there'd have been no effect. But the sparks, the other electricians that were working with him, said in practice when they were doing that job, they would have their thumb on the metal part of the snips to get the purchase necessary to get that insulating material off. He suffered a heart attack, and that came about because the most common reaction to electric shock is for muscles to contract. He was gripping his snips, the muscles in his hand contracted. He'd have desperately wanted to let go, but he couldn't. So that night I'd got home from work a bit later than normal. I was standing in the kitchen and I was making my dinner, and I'd just actually been thinking, when's that wee shite coming back to fix that socket for me? Just as I'd been thinking that, the phone went, and it was my mum to tell me that Michael had been in an accident in Dundee and that her and my dad were on their way to the hospital. So we jumped in our car, we set off on the 60-mile drive north, and when we got to the car park at 9 Wells Hospital in Dundee, I could see my mum and dad standing up at the door of accident and emergency, and I just knew that he was dead. They'd have been at his bedside otherwise. There were a series of safety failures that resulted in Michael's death. Lock-off tag-out devices weren't provided by Michael's employer, despite being referred to in the company's method statement. The company also didn't provide the testing equipment that they should have. They didn't keep the risk assessment live. So a risk assessment for low voltage electrical work is described by the mechanical project manager at the trial as being a living document, when in fact it was nothing of the sort. It was described by the HSE as being completely inadequate. Supervision was abysmal. The electrical supervisor was to tell the HSE inspectors when he was interviewed that he didn't regard it as part of his job to ensure that safe working practices were adhered to at all times. But the fact is that we're never going to know all of the answers to what led to Michael's death, because some of those answers could only be given by Michael himself. We don't know the process that Michael followed leading up to him cutting that cable. Did he test? We don't know. Or did he use a shortcut that it seems that a lot of sparks used then, and I think still used today, which is to cut through all three parts of a cable at the same time, and if it goes bang, it means it's live. I think the fact is that if management had been doing their job on that site, then if there were shortcuts, they wouldn't have been acceptable. The safe systems of work wouldn't have just existed on paper, they would actually have been put into practice. There would have been the correct training and support there for the supervisor, and the guys on that site would have had the right safety equipment to be doing their jobs safely. And Michael, he would still be alive today. Michael was a larger-than-life character. He would bounce into a room, and it will sound a bit cheesy because he was an electrician, but he was the person who would light it up. He had a cheeky grin. He had the patter to match that cheeky grin. He was the person who would be there to help. Even if you hadn't asked for help, he just somehow knew that you needed it. Michael was also a keen golfer, and a very good one at that, and that's the reason why we play a memorial golf tournament for him every year. He also loved football, although his choice of team left a lot to be desired because he was a Jambo Hearts fan. But the fact was he was 26 years old and engaged to be married. And he had his whole life ahead of him to live. Michael was a son, a brother and a fiancé, and he didn't live to get the opportunity to become an uncle, a husband or a dad.